Father David McCallum of the Society of Jesus is the Executive Director of the Discerning Leadership Program, an intensive effort that supports church leaders in developing the attitudes, skills, and knowledge required to lead in a synodal manner. Before spearheading this program, Father McCallum spent 12 years at Le Moyne College as an educator and administrator, spending the last of those years as Vice President for Mission Integration. Father McCallum's doctoral studies focused on the intersection between spirituality and leadership at Columbia University, and he has brought those ideas into his work in mission integration and Ignatian formation. On September 27th, we welcomed Father McCallum to our virtual office for a conversation about synodal leadership and how it can be implemented in Jesuit schools.
The sort of elevator speech on the Discerning Leadership Program is we offer formation for senior church officials, people who are Vatican administrators, major superiors of religious orders headquartered in Rome, and for lay people who are working in the service of the church in the Roman Curia. We give them formation for leadership for a synodal church, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that means. But in a sense, we're bringing together both the capacities of leadership and the competencies, the abilities and that sense of maturity it takes to be able to use these leadership tools wisely, and the ability to hone those tools. The vision of the program is really coming most of all from our response to Pope Francis's request at the beginning of his papacy for the Society of Jesus to share the skills and the sort of spirituality of discernment as a gift to the church coming out of our Ignatian spiritual tradition or heritage. And as we began to do that, we realized that this intersection between Ignatian discernment and leadership skills, decision-making, was really actually a really powerful combination. We developed a whole leadership development program for European Jesuits and their colleagues. And then from that, this Discerning Leadership Program for senior church leaders came about. We might admit that when we think of the Catholic Church, we often think of a hierarchy, almost like a pyramid of organization with, folks who are in the parishes, and then the bishop, and then some like vague hierarchy of archbishops and cardinals, and then finally the Pope. And that pyramid is only a real small part of what the church is. There's also this whole horizontal dimension of us as we experience community with one another, and as we work in ministries and schools, and as there's the service of the poor and refugees, right? So this horizontal dimension of the church is equally, if not more important than the hierarchy, the vertical dimension. Synodality is really about helping to foster an integration of that horizontal and vertical dimension. Synodality is about a process of involving people and listening to feedback and responding to feedback so that it can grow and improve. Synodality is very much about creating spaces where there's a space for listening to those who are marginal in the church, those who have been disenfranchised in some way, people who feel alienated. And so that the church is going out of its way, in a sense, to listen to those people, and hopefully in that exchange of real deep listening, finding ways to bring about reconciliation and restoration. The question is, how do we, in fact, help people to work more collaboratively? How do we help people to in a sense, lower the silos and help bring about better collaboration across apostolates and missions? This question of how does Ignatian spirituality and the Jesuit tradition serve this call to synodal leadership? And I would say there's three. Okay, let's be honest. It's not only three. It's a very typical Jesuit way of responding to say it's only three, but here's three. Okay. One is that the Jesuit tradition, the Ignatian spiritual approach, really sees the importance of fostering the maturation of the whole person to grow in inner freedom from the things that hold us back from love, and from putting ourselves more fully and generously in the service of others and a greater good. And so at the heart of synodality, it's this call for people to go beyond themselves and to extend themselves into community and for service of a greater, a common good. So that's number one. Number two, at the heart of Ignatian spirituality is that inner freedom is so much about enhancing our ability to make good decisions, decisions that are of benefit, not only to ourselves, but others. And to do that, not just by ourselves, but with others, right? So the tradition around individual and communal discernment, I think, are really great gifts to the church. We're not the only spiritual tradition within the Catholic Church that offers discernment. And in fact, that's one of the things we're learning as we approach synodality right now, as a global church with many different religious orders and many different spiritual traditions weighing in. But I think the Society of Jesus has been recognized historically to have a very special gift in this regard. So that was number two. Number three, it has been the habit of Jesuits to work collaboratively, really from very early on. And even though we often joke that the hardest folks to collaborate with are amongst ourselves, right? In fact, there's an incredible tradition of Jesuits working interdependently with one another, with community stakeholders, with benefactors, with those who want to be part of a common solution. And part of that is, I think that in the Society of Jesus, there's a tradition that even though we're often caricaturized for our obedience and being told what to do and going to do it, the reality is, and most of us know this, it's much more of a back and forth exchange. So that, as I was saying before, there's a kind of horizontal and a vertical dimension. Yes, ultimately, the superior is going to have the last say. However, before the superior makes a decision, there's a lot of back and forth that goes into making that decision, whether it's around an individual assignment or ultimately the direction and future of an apostolate, right? So I would say in our Ignatian tradition, this way of thinking about decisions that includes process and dialogue, and yet ultimately a buck stops here approach with someone who's responsible for taking the decision. This, in a sense, is a really good way of thinking about the synodal process and the way in which ultimately, whoever the Pope is, they will benefit from this broad consultative process so that whatever the decisions they and other members of the hierarchy take are better informed. Ask about how in a sense, the caricature of Ignatius with one foot raised can help us to think about leadership today, especially at the school level, but not only. Probably with COVID and all of the adaptation we've had to make over the last 2 years, a lot of us are tired of the word pivot, right? It's become like that word that we really can't stand anymore because we know it means we're not just going to do stuff differently, but it means we have to change. We have to let go of things that we were attached to before. We have to get out of our comfort zones. We have to try new things. We have to enter into this space of uncertainty that might feel awkward, unpredictable. Well, I think that, in fact, our Ignatian tradition is really valuable there. Even though I hate to say it, because I don't like going out of my comfort zone, in a sense, like anybody else. However, I've come to realize that that's the time I grow the most, and that's the time that there's the most possibility for creativity. So one of the things that we try to capitalize on there is the way that an Ignatian leader, in a sense, takes in the current reality in a discerning way. So the current reality we know by this acronym. It's called VUCA, right? And it stands for V, volatility, U, uncertainty, C, complexity, A, ambiguity. right? This acronym, VUCA, right, describing these 4 kind of characteristics of what it's like to live and to lead today, it means that we're dealing constantly with the unknown. And it's natural that in the face of the unknown, we're going to experience fear and anxiety. An Ignatian leader is going to be able to bracket that and find that place of inner peace and equilibrium again, so that we don't react out of fear, out of scarcity, out of a sense of anxiety or insecurity, but we can be creative in that moment, and in a sense see that VUCA, those VUCA conditions, that uncertainty is actually a whole field of possibility to be shaped. So an Ignatian leader, again, working with grace, not to be reactive, but to see this as, in a sense, a blank canvas to work with, can bring others together and say, well, what do we want to dream um, of that will sort of bring about a better future than the one we're living right now? How do we, in a sense, use this uncertainty, these shifts, and do this in a way that actually lets go of the things that are not working and improves upon all the things that are, right? How do we, in this moment of disruption, actually see opportunity, and to see that with our mission, which is such an extraordinary mission, we can actually chart a future, design it together, enlist other people to be co-creators of it, and then move forward to making it happen. Pope Francis likes to use a word in Italian. It's kind of a funny sounding word, squilibrio. And squilibrio is the word that he uses to describe being unbalanced. And he said, when we're in a time of squilibrio, we don't feel like our 2 feet are firmly planted on the ground and that we can simply move forward on our own power. With our sense of imbalance, or even the awkwardness of that, we have to realize at that moment, I have to rely on others for that balance. I have to rely on God's grace. And that's what opens us up, in fact, to possibilities that might not have existed otherwise. So it's a little bit of that Pope Francis take on what 1 foot raised these days might mean. A sense of being able to embrace the squilibrio and the sense of possibility and creativity that could come out of that moment, not only for ourselves, but for the institutions that we lead. I think today, the capacity to build trust on a team, to model it, right, by being trustworthy, by being a person of integrity, by being a person who's willing to be vulnerable about our strengths and weaknesses, and open to people's critical feedback, and to be courageous at the same time, to take important risks, to do something that's never been done before, to take the risk of failing, even as we really intend to do something great. That this capacity to build trust by modeling trustworthiness and creating spaces where teams can, in a sense, tap their own greatest gifts together and harmonize those gifts for greater good. I'd say that's the task. So we have a website here in Rome, and it's actually www.discerningleadership.org. And there you can find a huge archive of materials and resources for Ignatian leadership, for discernment and discernment in common, and information also that we send out on a weekly basis through our newsletter, including videos and interviews and things like that. So please feel free to sign up for our newsletter, Discerning Leadership, on the road together, and to tap into those resources that we provide. They're open and free. And of course, if people wanted to follow up with me in person, I'm happy to do that. One last thought is this. When I was teaching at Canisius High School in Buffalo and working with young men, and I know that our schools include both young men and women today in many places, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about that future ahead. And so the cultures and atmospheres that we help to create space for in our communities, our educational communities, are so critical to build not a kind of sense of empty optimism, but a sense of real confidence that God is with us and working, and that good things can happen when we really bring ourselves together in the mission, and to help young people know that because of our willingness to do hard things together, that the future doesn't have to be as scary as it often looks, that we can create together the future that we dream of rather than simply sliding into the future that we all fear. And I think that in our schools, um, conveying this sense of, in a sense, vulnerability and yet faith, of courage and of hopefulness, that this is so essential for ourselves, but certainly for our next generations. So personally, I would like to just thank all of our school leaders, both principals and presidents and faculty leaders, those who work in campus ministries, those who do retreat work and service work, our coaches, to thank all of them for the formation work that you all do for young people and for giving them that hope in the future. Thanks.
We would like to extend our thanks to Father McCallum for speaking with us and for sharing his reflections and insights on what it means to be a synodal leader. We now invite those watching this video to reflect on the following 3 questions. Feel free to pause the video at any point if you wish to allow yourself more time to think. Question number 1. Was there anything in Father McCallum's presentation with which you connected that brought about hope or joy? Question number 2. Was there anything with which you were unsettled that brought about anxiety or doubt? Question number 3. How do you see yourself growing as an Ignatian synodal leader? On behalf of all of us at the Jesuit Schools Network, thank you so much for watching.